PodSham Pod.
Welcome back to the PodSham Pod. Today's episode is brought to you by Whole Foods perfectly crisp jalapeno cheese crisps, 100% aged Parmesan. Speaking of 100% aged, we are also brought to you by Damian Lillard's upcoming revenge tour. And today is a very special day because we are joined by Max's brother, Sam Klotz, aka the Candace Owens of NBA media.
Happy to be here. I'm here to provide objective, impartial advice. Since we're doing the top 32 players in the NBA, and I'm a Knicks fan, I'm capable of being completely objective because the Knicks have none of them.
Yeah, so we're going to be going from number 32 through number 12, which includes a player who we really thought was going to be on the Knicks for a second there, but turns out not. So this is kind of the second tier of stars in the NBA. All the players who aren't quite good enough to get you all the way to the promised land on their own, but if they're your second option, you're in pretty good shape. So we're starting to get into some pretty name brand stars here.
Yeah, so let's use your list as the touch point. And then like when there are guys that I have very different feelings on, and for Sam, we'll chime in.
Yep. Sam, just shoot from the hip whenever you hear something that strikes a chord.
All right, I hate it already.
Here we go. So if you recall from the last episode when we did players 54 to 33, I've divided this into tiers and sub tiers as well. So we are coming up on tier 3, which I call good to great number twos, and getting into tier 3C, which is players 25 through 32, who I call good number twos. So in reverse order, number 32, Bradley Beal. Number 31, Anthony Edwards. Number 30, Zach LaVine. Number 29, DeMar DeRozan. I'm going to start with those 4. There's another 4 in the little tier, but those I think are going to have more debate. So let's see if we can just knock those first 4 off. Beal, Edwards, LaVine, DeRozan.
Are we talking 82 games or 16?
Good question. So my thought process behind this list was drafting players for a full regular season and playoffs. So the regular season matters because you want good seeding to be able to have an advantage in the playoffs, but playoffs also matters because you want to be able to be good in the playoffs. So with that said, current injuries don't really matter, but people who are known to be unreliable or get hurt a lot, it will ding their stock a little bit. So it's kind of a combination of the two because at this point, it feels like the playoffs and the regular season are almost two completely different sports. So I had to try to find some way to marry the two.
So, okay, to get back to those 4 guys, I think we agree about 3 out of 4. The only real difference I had is I had Bradley Beal all the way up at 23. And that's just because I still believe that he is the type of guy who has been a great stats bad team guy because he's been the best player on his team since John Wall disappeared. And I really do believe that as even the second guy, like Bradley Beal could look really good on on a competitive team. I don't want to say he's number 2 on a contender, maybe a couple of years ago, because I think his defense has really declined. He was never a good defender, but I think last year was his worst defensive season ever. But yeah, I just think he would look a lot different as the number 2 dude, and we punish him for being, for having to lead an incompetent organization.
Well, the biggest problem with Bradley Beal is that he was really bad last year. Like he shot 30% from 3 and 45% from the floor. And was generally just not very
45 for his volume is, and 30 was an outlier in his career. He obviously takes he takes a ton of bad shots for that team. Like
he's someone who you think is a really good shooter, and then you go and look at the numbers and he hasn't shot above really 35% from 3 for the last 4 years. He was 30% last year, 35 the year before, 35 the year before, 35 the year before that. And then you have to go all the way back to 2018 to when he was 38. He seems like someone who's a really good shooter just because it looks really pretty. He was comped to Ray Allen coming out of college, so I feel like that's kind of stuck with people a little bit. But I mean, he's really much more of a scorer than a shooter. And yeah, he was someone who was all NBA a couple years ago and led the league in score, or actually last year he led the league in scoring, or 2 years ago rather. But yeah, I think the drop off last year, he may have had some lingering injuries, but that was definitely worrying. And the top of the league is so strong. I didn't really want to put him ahead of Anthony Edwards or a guy like even DeMar DeRozan, who may have had a bit of an outlier year last year, but still you have to give him some credit for how he carried that Chicago team last year.
Yeah, I'm still not ready to say that I think Anthony Edwards is a better 3-point shooter than Beal, because of Beal's role, and the difficulty of shots he has to take. And he got to the line a couple fewer times a game last year, which is what scares me the most, because I do just view him as a good shooter, not like an elite one, but a good one, and a great shot creator. By all accounts, like, has the intangibles as a hard worker, and he's only 29. I don't think he has such a terrible injury history that like he can't be an all NBA, or like in the conversation for third team all NBA again before he's out of his prime. And so yeah, this isn't, last year he definitely wasn't a top 25 player in the league, but this is me guessing that he has a bounce back season, like kind of Pip. He doesn't want to play like he did last year.
Yeah, and to be clear, I was not saying it was Anthony Edwards was a better 3-point shooter than him. And maybe I'm doing a little bit of projection with Anthony Edwards here, because certainly just going off the numbers from last year alone, Beal is the better option.
Yeah.
Although Edwards did have a pretty awesome playoff series. And actually, I think you have Edwards higher than I do on your list, but because I had him at, what was it, 30? 31?
No, we both had him at exactly 31. So that's why I didn't mention him. But yeah, I think I'd still rather have Bradley Beal than LaVine, than Anthony Edwards for this season. Like, if you told me like to win a title right now, would you rather have Anthony Edwards or Bradley Beal on the Nets? Like if you could just plug them in with Kevin Durant and Kyrie, I would rather have Beal, I think, just because he's played in a couple, I know, insignificant playoff games, and like he's just a pro. I don't get the feeling that he's a locker room cancer at all. And yeah, so we probably will never get to see him in his appropriate role. But I didn't want to dock him too much because of that.
I mean, these are all guys who are all of these guys I think are pretty hard to place, because Edwards could easily be in the top 15 next year. And Beal, I feel, could also easily be lower next year. And you're kind of rating him based on his previous years. And then DeRozan, who we haven't talked about, he was probably the one I took the most issue with. And that's why I asked you if we were talking about playoffs or just regular season. Because DeRozan, to me, can't be a top 30 player in the NBA if we're going to include playoffs.
Yeah, I gave him a slight edge just because of his playmaking. And in the regular season, I think last year he was a significant step above both Beal and Edwards. So when you factor in playoffs and him being historically a worse performer in the playoffs, that sort of evens out to, being right next to each other. But he did average 28, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. He shot 50% from the field last year, which may not be super sustainable because it was a very heavy mid-range diet, but he gets to the line a lot. He's extremely efficient and really has taken significant strides forward in terms of an all-around offensive game the last couple of years and when he was in San Antonio. So that was why I gave him a slight edge over Beal and Edwards. I could definitely see doing this list this time next year, and DeRozan has kind of come back a bit to his career efficiency. Edwards has taken a step. Maybe Beal has a bounce back year and this looks dumb, but I just feel going off of last year, you have to boost him at least a little bit.
Yeah, I think the fact that he shot, he actually did pretty well from 2, that he was even at 45 in the true shooting he shot with a 30% 3-point percentage. So I'm just basically betting that's an outlier. If his 3-point shooting wasn't an outlier, then you guys are right about this one.
So the rest of that, does anyone want to touch on Zach LaVine at all? Or I feel like we kind of all know who Zach LaVine is as a player.
Yeah, I think we're probably all around the same spot with him.
Okay, so the rest of that tier, I had a hard time ordering. This is the rest of good number 2s, 3C. 28, Zion Williamson. 27, Chris
Wait,
Middleton.
wait. Can we do like 5 seconds of silence? Zion Williamson. All right, go on.
27, Chris Middleton. 26, Brandon Ingram. 25, Pascal Siakam. Drew, I know you're chomping at the bit on Zion, so I feel like I'm not even going to prepare my defenses. I'm just going to let you go, and I'll do my best to keep you at bay.
Yeah, I wouldn't want Zion on the team that I root for. If I of the guys in this portion of your rankings, I just wouldn't want to spin the wheel on Zion's health and physical condition. If I'm trying to win a title this year, which is obviously was what I weighted number one, like playoffs this year. Obviously, you need it and regular season because he hasn't played a lot of games. So yeah, we also haven't seen a playoff version of Zion. The last time we saw him defending, he was the kind of guy who would get attacked in the playoffs, especially because you want to get him out of gas for offense. But and then on the offensive end, if he, I'm sure he'd be great. And there are a lot of guys in this part of your ranks that would be great on offense in the playoffs. And I just value some two-way, some guys who are better two-way players and more durable. So I think it's a complete insult to DeMar DeRozan, Draymond, Jamal Murray, that these guys with real playoff equity aren't above baby Zion in your player rankings.
Baby Zion, aka Baby Shaq, though. If I were just
baby
picking
Shaq
one,
is Giannis.
Fair. If I were just picking one player to try to win the title, I would maybe even put him higher because the potential upside of Zion is like the best player in the league. He's completely impossible to deal with when he actually plays. And I grant you that he hasn't played that much and he's not that good on defense, but we've seen time and time again, teams make up for players who aren't that good on defense. And he was good on defense in college, and his shooting numbers are just insane. His scoring numbers, are just insane.
Last time he played pretty close to a full season, which was his second year, he was a more productive paint scorer than Giannis and had the most productive paint scoring season since Shaq. There's no one in the NBA who can stay in front of him. And if you do stay in front of him, there's no one who can hold ground aside from Steven Adams or someone like that when he puts his shoulder into you. There's absolutely nothing to do with him on offense. Granted, yes, very questionable on defense. I'm hoping / projecting, but mostly hoping that with a little bit more sort of in shape and just kind of having a full off season to get himself right, he'll be able to have more of an impact on that end. And also he's not going to have to carry much of they're going to have a very balanced attack in New Orleans. Semler's already shaking his head. He just doesn't see it coming, but
it's just insulting to Draymond Green. It's really insulting because how's his body going to hold up? You guys have dodged that one. Embiid is the exception, not the rule. When the first couple of years go this way, it's usually not a great sign. And I had Zion at 40, I think, somewhere in that range. And so obviously I think very highly of him. There's so much talent in the league right now. To be in the top 40, you're really, really good. But I just there isn't enough. There isn't enough there. Michael Porter Jr. the last time he was playing was a transcendent, all-time great shooter. And I think he's a really good shooter, but he's not Klay Thompson. And don't overreact to a small sample of Zion before his body failed him for a long period of time.
It wasn't just his second year. His first year too, he was an absolutely unstoppable paint force. And when it comes to
he was a number one pick, so he's got the pedigree from college of being an unstoppable paint force. So he's at every level.
You think he can be physically? You think he can be physically dominant in the playoffs?
Yeah.
Why not?
Because
look at Giannis.
I don't know. But Giannis's first couple playoffs were pretty ugly offensively. And he didn't have, and Zion doesn't have Giannis's defense, which made him a great player in the playoffs from the start, even when he had things to figure out, but how to score, how to in the paint, how to still be efficient in the playoffs when things tighten up and you can't shoot threes.
Yeah, but I think physically Zion may be even more undeniable than Giannis is when it comes to getting into the paint. Like if we're talking just pure scoring, I don't know if there
Drew
are
Semler has left the chat.
I don't know if there are like 9 players that I would want more than Zion when it comes to just pure scoring on a possession. Just his ability to get into the paint. If he misses, he seems to get his offensive rebound about half the time, 2/3 of the time. Maybe I'm having rose-colored glasses and nostalgia because I haven't seen this guy play in a while, and when I did, he was probably my favorite player to watch in the league. But we got to the.
Have we seen recent photos? Like, is he in shape?
I'm done looking. I'm done with the daily fitness updates on Zion.
Yeah. Especially
Frankly,
the last fitness update I got about the NBA was the Kawhi picture that went viral today, where someone just photoshopped his legs to like balloons.
NBA fitness Twitter is probably the worst. Might be the worst part of NBA Twitter.
Yeah.
Also, those who claimed that Luka was like skinny Luka, which seems to have just taken hold. If you watch the Eurobasket, he looks like the same guy. He's still got the kind of fat face. He looks like the same guy. He's dominating, but he looks like the same guy.
All right, Max is having a Sutterer moment here.
Yeah, no.
That's Sutterer MD is the only guy you should look to for NBA physical evaluation. So at least public facing. All right.
No, I did.
Well, yes, basically you're buying that a small sample of Zion, tells the story and that he's just going to be like a transcendent offensive player.
Yep. And you got to put him somewhere on the list, right? And if you put him down at 40, you raise something like an asshole when he's like the best player in the league next year. If you put him at 20, what was it? 25?
28.
Yeah. The thing
28.
is, each time you go up a slot on the list, that slot carries more weight. Like, it is lonely at the top of this league. And so I actually would say, yes, it's riskier what I did because there's like, even if the chance that Zion is healthy is small, that chance has a lot of really positive outcomes that come with it. But I don't buy that like in his first playoff run, if everything went well this year, that I'd still rather have him than some of these other guys that I've seen take over playoff games.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'll admit, I moved
Jamal
him down.
Murray, dude. Jamal Murray's back and supposedly fully healthy. Like
Jamal Murray's never made an all-star team. Zion's already made an all-star team, and I believe made an all-NBA team as well.
That's why Jamal's hungrier.
No one's hungrier than Zion. We know that.
Okay. Don't end your own argument.
I did have him higher before, and then I sort of was like, okay, I can't have him. I had him at the top of this little group before, and I was like, I can't do that. So ahead of him, I still have Middleton, who I actually found Middleton really hard to rank because I don't know if he's gotten weirdly like overrated after the Boston series, because I do believe if Middleton was there, the Bucks would have beaten Boston, but now it's sort of like Middleton is kind of the savior figure. He's someone who, if he's your number one option, you're probably not going very far, but he's a solid number 2 and an extremely overqualified number 3. It's kind of hard to tell who's the number 2 between him and Drew in Milwaukee, but Middleton, Ingram,
I think he's a really good 3 and a decent and a fine 2.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he's an extremely overqualified 3. I think like they won the title. They didn't like demolish everyone.
True.
And so he's one of the better 3s that you're ever gonna see. But yeah.
And that's why he's in the good number 2 tier. And Ingram,
I think they missed his defense too a little bit.
I think this is a fair spot for him. I mean, if you ask, would you rather have Zach LaVine or Chris Middleton if you're trying to win the title? Probably Chris Middleton because of the defense. Yeah. And if Zach LaVine's your number 1, I mean, if either of them are your number 1, then you're not going to win the title anyway. So you probably would have Middleton.
Yeah. Brandon Ingram at 26. I just wanted to shout out what Brandon Ingram did in the playoffs because it was in the first round against the Suns team that fell in unceremonious fashion in the next round. So I feel like it's sort of been forgotten a little bit, but in 6 games against the Suns, where it really is, well, I guess him and CJ, they had 2 primary offensive options. He averaged 27 points a game, 6 assists and 6 rebounds on 40% shooting from 3, 48% overall, and taking 8 free throws a game. he had a really productive playoff series and I think a very auspicious beginning to his playoff career. I don't believe he'd ever been in the playoffs before that. So, I mean, I am going to be like appointment viewing every Pelicans game this year just because I love Zion so much and I want to see how it all works with Ingram
Stop saying his
and
names. Just stop. Not once again in this podcast, please.
CJ. So
If he can't stay in shape now, where's he going, dude? Who at this age can't stay in shape? I think this is one of those topics that Charles Barkley actually has the right, like just the right guy to look to for
Yes.
feedback in this situation.
you know, well, we're done with Zion, but with Ingram,
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see how he blends into that whole offensive mix next year. Do you guys think there's a fair spot for him, or do you think I've seen some people that have him like in the top 20, but that seems
I
low
had
risk for me.
BI at 22. I like think I'm like very bought into his shot making, and he's become a good enough shooter to weaponize his vision even more. And I know like he should be a positive defender, but he's never going to be a disaster with his length. So yeah, I'm all in on him being a top 25 guy right now.
Yeah, I think this is fair. I might have put Middleton ahead of him, but I think you're quibbling about one spot or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd rather that Ingram is your best player if you're like a bad team.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. And then, rounding out that tier was two-time All NBA player Pascal Siakam.
Yes, sir.
Averaged 23, 9 rebounds and 5 assists last year. Slightly below average 3-point shooting, but I gave the edge just kind of because of the all-around game. And I mean, he's been the best player on a couple, middle playoff seeds now. That's nothing to scoff at. And on defense, he definitely has an edge over most of the guys in this tier. But I did find him a little hard to rank as well, just because he's sort of been up and down in his career. I don't know.
Yeah, I would have put him at the bottom of this tier. I think the other guys are more proven. And like, if you go 1 for 1, but I'd rather have him or Brandon Ingram, I value the creation, shot making, scoring of Ingram. Him versus Middleton. Middleton is sort of a similar role, but just better defender and more experienced. Forget the other guys in this tier, but Summer wants to go off here.
Yeah. I just dropped him the like, whoa, Zoom reaction. So I probably like distracted him from his whole spiel, but yeah, I had Pascal in my top 20 because there are no number ones in this tier. And I think that he is a really, really good number 2.
Dude, that's way too high.
Yeah, I had him at 19. I think that you are sleeping on the season that he had last year. And like, he actually there wasn't much he could do because Van Vliet had a really rough round 1. They still pushed the Sixers close to their limit. And Siakam was like pretty good for a guy who definitely shouldn't be the best player on the team, but like can guard so many different guys. I think like by all accounts is like one of the best personalities and like workers that you could have in your locker room. So like if these aren't number ones, like he's one of the first guys that I want. I think he had a real case to be like, he was like a top 15 defender in the league last year, according to all the smart people that I follow.
I mean, good personality shouldn't get you into the top 20, but I'll grant you that he's okay on some other.
Yeah. Wasn't he like
areas.
feuding with Nick Nurse at one point? Like, I don't know if it's like A1 personality, but
yes. And Jimmy was feuding with Spoelstra.
fair enough.
It's called
All right.
It's called having some dog in you.
Fair enough. So we're now moving on to tier 3B, which is 3 players, and I call them great number 2s with playoff concerns. Special shout out to Drew's friend Andy, who's going to have a bit of a conniption when I say number 24. He's a Nets fan. 24, James Harden. 23, Rudy Gobert. 22,
Travesty.
Karl Anthony Towns. Harden, Gobert, Towns for 24, 23, 22. James Harden, really hard to rank because he still manages to put up really impressive numbers. But, if you watch him, and particularly if you watch him in the playoffs, it looks like he doesn't really know where he is. Like he's kind of disoriented. But I just have all the right things are being said as far as his in shapeness, talking about NBA fitness Twitter once more. And he's
I
still
thought we
is
were
one
discrediting NBA fitness Twitter here.
Side note, there was a great picture that came out where it was like Harden in shape, like angry emoji, and it just looked like normal James Harden with a dad bod. So I guess I'm just raining on the parade of all the NBA fitness Twitter people, but he's still one of the best playmakers in the league. Like when you're listing the best passers, there's sort of that upper tier of Jokic, LeBron, Luka, Chris Paul. And then once you get past that, I think James Harden is right in that mix.
Can I save you the energy, Max?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because this, we can't be doing this. James Harden, 2 shots, second half, last game of the season, quit on his team for what, like the fourth time we've seen him do it in a bad way. Forget the fact that he looked way less explosive, and like doesn't usually happen where a guy at his age looks less explosive after the workload, like the number of carries he's had in his career, and then like comes back, like much more physically impressive. So
if you count off court activity, he's had a lot of carries.
Yes. Yes. So no, let me spin the wheel with a guy who still hasn't proven to me that he isn't a playoff guy before I have James Harden in my top 25. But yeah, that's all I'm going to say there.
I'm with Drew. This is way too high. He might be washed. I'd rather have Pascal Siakam.
I mean, I'd rather have Cade Cunningham. Like, I know that sounds so ridiculous. Like, spin the wheel on.
I'd rather have Jalen Brunson.
No, no. I'm like, you say that, but I don't. I think I'd rather have Alex Caruso than James Harden in the playoffs.
No,
I think that's where I'm at.
This is an anti-James Harden podcast.
If you have Alex Caruso instead of James Harden, well, I mean, they're not beating Toronto. Well, that's a ridiculous hypothetical, but
you have to respect the gods of the sport, Max.
Look,
I really mean it. This is like before when I said back in the day when Russ was still really good. I said I'd rather have, this is like bubble Caruso. I said I'd rather have this bubble Caruso than for 40 million than Russ for 40 million. And I really kind of live and die by that. Like, you can't go anywhere with a guy who quits on your team when he's looked to lead, when he's the guy touching the ball more than anyone. Like, if that guy quits on you, you don't have a chance. So sure, he's one of the best scorers and creators ever. That just doesn't matter anymore. He's let down too many seasons.
Well, ideally,
I just want the listeners of this podcast to know that I do not co-sign the Alex Caruso take. I do not co-sign the Alex Caruso take.
Well, ideally, you have Joel Embiid to be your number one option, so you don't have to look to James Harden to lead you in those moments. But if he's your number 2 option, look, he and Embiid.
Oh yeah, he's a number 2 in the playoffs. That's for sure.
Walked into that one. He and Embiid still had the most like unstoppable by the numbers pick and roll combination in the league. A lot of that is Embiid, but a lot of that is Harden knowing when and where to get him the ball. He is a visionary passer, still a good scorer. I'll admit the shooting numbers have me a little worried that he was at 33% from 3 last year, because as his explosiveness goes, he's going to need to kick that up a little bit.
Is he still a good scorer for the amount that he requires the ball, that he expects the ball?
I mean, by PER, he's still an above average offensive player. Look, last year, no, I am projecting that he's going to be taking it more seriously this year. And even with what he was last year, he was still a 20-point scorer, 10 assists, 8 rebounds too. Like, that's a forgotten little part of his game, which he's very good at as well. And I just think, with a little bit more fitness and maybe this like hamstring injury, which can linger, who knows? That's like a lot of what's been said is lost some explosiveness due to the hamstring. Maybe that heals up. I still think basically I'm going to need to see one more year of him really not being at that level for me to kick him all the way down into the 40s. This is, I guess, somewhat rewarding for past performance, but I just think he's too young to have completely fallen off this cliff already. Like, he should still be in his prime. And last year was a weird season in Brooklyn. He definitely has not been in good shape the last 2 years. I'm just going to need one more year before I kick him down because he's still a visionary passer. He can still handle. He's got one of the best handles in the NBA. He can score in isolation. And do I get suckered into the Philadelphia 76ers every year? Yes. Am I going to do it again this year? Probably yes. And
yeah, you're a sicko. The numbers do not move me. I would rather take a swing on 29-year-old Bradley Beal than 33-year-old hamstring Harden.
He just has a level of creation that these other guys don't have.
So I'd rather have Harden than Beal.
And that's why you guys don't run NBA teams.
Sam, it seems like you're sort of in the middle of Drew and I. Where would you have Harden in this sort of these players that we've discussed? Do you think he belongs in the top 30?
No, I would have put him down maybe at the top of that Beal DeRozan tier. So ahead of DeRozan, kind of down in the top 30. But
okay,
I do agree based on his, based on who he is, you don't want to put him too low without seeing it. But we have seen it at the same time.
Fair enough. All right. Well, the rest of this great number twos with playoff concerns tier are actually teammates, Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns at 22 and 23. Both, I think, pretty polarizing players, kind of for opposite reasons, because for all of the people who love deep bags and, skill ball, Rudy Gobert might not quite be their cup of tea. I definitely saw T-Mac with some comments about Rudy Gobert and how has he not developed a hook shot or whatever. So there's certain people who Rudy Gobert will just never quite be what they want him to be. And then Karl Anthony Towns on the other end, super skilled, but just may not have the makeup and sort of the defensive intensity to really drive winning. At least we haven't really seen it to this point, at least the number one option. And now they're teammates. So that's kind of going to be an interesting relationship and I guess progression to see how that unfolds. Do you guys think, I guess we can start with Gobert. Any thoughts? Is he too high, too low?
No, I think if Doncic is the deepest bag in the NBA, then Rudy Gobert is like a chest pocket. So I'm with you on that. And I wasn't quite as high on Cat.
We in Minnesota now.
Indeed.
Yeah,
I think Cat gets a lot of shit for
just being awkward,
toughness concerns, but he's really good. I think this is a fair ranking for Towns.
Yeah, I'm curious to see I just want to see what Minnesota looks like. I mean, I've kind of tried to go through and do some Western Conference standings. And first of all, it's an impossible exercise. And second of all, I keep ending up with Minnesota at 7 or 8 just because I like all the other teams so much. But then I'm like, wait, they were a 7 seed last year and they added Rudy Gobert, who's probably in the regular season one of the most impactful players in the league. How are they not going to be significantly better? So I have no idea how that's going to work because it seems like they played the same position, and I guess Towns is going to be chasing around shooters and Gobert is just going to be cleaning up everybody's mess in the way that he was doing in Utah. But yeah, he's one of the most efficient players in the NBA, one of the most skilled big men of all time, honestly, when you think about his shooting. Yeah. And
I have a suspicion, and it was one of my first thoughts when they traded for Gobert, that they're definitely for now planning on playing Cat at the 4 and Gobert at the 5. You don't pay those two guys that much combined money unless that's your plan of attack. But that deep down, the move signaled to me that they see some of the things that worry me about Cat, and that if things don't go so well as Anthony Edwards ascends in the next couple of years, Cat is the one to go. And I just would rather have Cade Cunningham than Karl Anthony Towns. I just
this year.
Yes, I know it sounds ridiculous, but I just there are guys who haven't proven to me yet that they aren't playoff killers, and I just see Cade as one of those guys. So I had him at 25 and I had Cat at 27. I know it's radical. I know that one is radical, and that's why I say it to you, because it makes me smile.
All right, that's
Yeah.
kind of making my head hurt.
Like if I'm looking for true shooting, but by effective field goal percentage, Karl Anthony Towns was 13% higher than Cade Cunningham last year. And
Sorry,
I fully believe Cade's going to be a good shooter, but just the scoring game right now is not a contest when it comes between the two.
When
beyond
defense, offensive creation, two of the most important things in the playoffs.
beyond having said we in Minnesota now and then losing, has Towns done anything in the playoffs that's like that bad?
I mean, so this year in the playoffs, he's been to the playoffs 2 years. First year was bad. On a 8 seed Minnesota team, he averaged 15 points a game on pretty inefficient shooting. This past year, it was inconsistent, but he hit 22 points a game, 11 rebounds, a couple assists, roughly a little
Shot
49%,
45% from three.
45 from three. Yeah. I mean, he wasn't like
they couldn't get a stop to save their lives, and he plays the most he plays the most important position on defense. Now, like I get your defense of Zion. Like you can slide someone in behind Zion. He doesn't have to be the 5. You just get a 5 who can shoot semi decently, and you can make that work. But with Cat, like I don't see Cat guarding forwards.
yeah.
And so that's what really worries me. And I also feel like an asshole criticizing him like this because he had a year from hell like a couple of years ago, and like it would only make sense that stunted his growth as a player.
At the same time, like 7-footers who shoot 50% from the field, over 40% from three, really don't grow on trees. And this year will really test the limits of like how much you can have other guys cover for him defensively. And if it's kind of a massive failure, then next year I'll have no problem moving him down into the 30s and possibly the low 30s. But I just think with the scoring game and the skill, I afforded him the respect of putting him this high at least. And he did have a really good year last year. Although his numbers went down slightly in the playoffs, but yeah, I mean, this is one guy who I found pretty hard to rank just because there's such a wide gulf between his offensive production and his defensive weaknesses. So yeah, he's someone who I'm definitely very curious to watch this year to see. And who knows, Anthony Edwards may even surpass him this year. Finally, the top of tier 3, tier 3A, who I call great number 2s, 4 players who may have been one of the hardest groups of 4 for me to rank over the course of this whole exercise. At 21, I have Drew Holiday, 20, Bam Adebayo, 19, the hypothetical Nick, Donovan Mitchell, and 18, Jaylen Brown. Any thoughts
Donovan
on
Mitchell
those?
sucks, and there's no way you should ever trade for him or give up anything in a trade for Donovan Mitchell. He's not good. No, I'm kidding. I really like Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah, you're actually wearing Cleveland Cavaliers colors today.
Yeah, that was not intentional, I can assure you.
Yeah, I definitely struggled because Mitchell, he's played the role of the number 1 option on all of his teams so far, and he's actually had pretty good playoff success and his numbers have gone up in the playoffs. He's had kind of iconic playoff moments already, like that duel with Jamal Murray in the bubble, as well as when he knocked out Paul George and Russell Westbrook from the playoffs as a rookie, gone toe-to-toe with James Harden, all sorts of other guys in the playoffs. But at the same time, had a really embarrassing playoffs on the defensive end and hasn't really progressed as a playmaker in the way that you'd want from kind of a lead ball handler on the perimeter. So I put him slightly behind Jaylen Brown, but because of his playoff scoring, I had him above Drew Holiday and Bam Adebayo, even though obviously on defense, those are 2 of the probably 10 best defenders in the whole league.
Yeah. No disagreements here. I think that we were pretty close on all 4 of those guys.
Yeah.
I also think it's important to note that it's harder to find good offense than it is to find good defense. So you're totally justified ranking the offensive guys higher.
Yeah. Drew
and
was
Jaylen
one.
Brown's a beast.
Yeah, Jaylen Brown's a beast. I want to pull up his playoff stats as well. Drew was one who I had some trouble ranking just because I wasn't sure who I wanted to call the number 2 option in Milwaukee between him and Middleton. And I actually have him quite a bit higher than Middleton in the end. And I don't know if that's fair because it feels like they're pretty close. In the regular season, he had an awesome scoring year or an awesome efficiency year, shot 50% from the field, 40% from three, and averaged 18 points a game, 7 assists. But I do remember, as someone who was rooting heavily for the Bucks in that Boston series, that it just felt like he wasn't quite the level of creator that they needed. And he was going against maybe an all-time great defense in that Celtics team that totally shut down Kevin Durant the round before. So it's no shame not being able to score as well as you normally can against them. But it definitely did feel in that Milwaukee series that they needed a level of shot creation that he wasn't able to provide. And I think that's ultimately what had me slide him to the back of this.
I think we know the deal with playoff Drew at this point. He's going to be completely elite on defense. He's going to make some tough shots, but he's going to be inefficient on offense. And he's totally a guy that you want to go to war with. So like all of those things combined, we ended up with him around the same spot.
Yeah. Anything we want to say on Bam? I personally was left a little cold by his playoffs. I felt like Jimmy had to shoulder a ton of the load for that Miami team, and I'd like to see Bam take more steps on offense to try to kind of take some of that burden off of Jimmy Butler. But at the same time, he's one of the most versatile defenders in the league, one of the best defenders at the center position. Like, it's hard to ask for much more than that.
I think based on the Bam, the person, like it wouldn't shock me if he's bumps himself up a few spots this year, because it feels like he's plateaued for a year or two. Since the bubble playoffs, like he hasn't taken the steps that I know like that organization expected of him, and he probably expected of himself. So I don't know what his ceiling is, just because it doesn't look like he's ever going to be a shooter, but he does pretty much everything else. And for that reason, I think, I think he could, I expect him to have a real like reminder of who he is here.
All right. Okay. So we're getting into the last 6 guys that we're going to talk about today. This is the back half of tier 2. The name of the overall tier is number ones on deep playoff runs and elite number 2s. And this little sub tier is called elite number 2s, often miscast as number 1s. So starting at 17, we've got Chris Paul. 16, Paul George, the 2 double first name club. Then 15, Damian Lillard, and 14, Anthony Davis. AD, we'll get to AD. I found him incredibly hard to rank, but Chris Paul at 17, do you think he still deserves to be at that spot after the playoffs that he had, or do you project him to slide down these rankings?
I think he'll slide a little bit, but I also had him a couple slots lower than you did. Only because like it's just like another guy where I'm like, I have seen enough and he's old enough now that I'll take my chances with some less proven guys, but guys who also haven't let me down the way that CP has, whether his body isn't holding up or his team is as dejected as they looked last year, which we still don't know the full story of what the Suns were going through and how that game 7 happened. But I don't have a good taste in my mouth from last season. For that reason, I'll bet on someone else.
Yeah.
I feel like he's appropriately ranked.
Okay. Paul George, another one who missed a lot of games last year, but when he's healthy is kind of an elite second option because of his scoring efficiency, his ability to play on the ball, off the ball, score at all 3 levels, although you'd ideally like to see him score at the rim a little bit more with how athletic as he is. But he seems like a classic, like fringe top 15 player. I don't know. Any quibbles with him at 16?
Nope.
I think that's perfect.
Your Lord and Savior Damian Lillard coming in at 15.
Yeah.
Drew, I know you have him a little bit higher. I have some questions coming off this injury that he had, which really seemed to affect him the last year in those Olympics where he was outplayed by Drew Holiday. But yeah, I'll let you go, Drew, on what you're expecting from Dame this year.
Yeah, just that he was hurt for a long time and that he's healthy again. So I had him at 12. It's just sort of a prediction ranking. that like he has one more vintage season in him.
Yeah.
I follow Portland's realm very closely, and I feel like I have a decent bullshit detector, and I do believe that he is really healthy right now and feels more spry than he has in a couple seasons. So yeah, and like he was a top 12 player a couple of seasons ago. So
Yeah.
I feel like I'm generally pretty rational about my teams. I just believe that he's going to have a fuck you season and be back up there for at least one more year.
Anything on Dame, Sam?
No.
All right.
I mean, yeah, I think this is fair.
Yeah, everyone uses that Kevin Durant, like, this is a spiritual experience tweet. And I believe that when that was actually sent was in reference to Dame's playoff game against the Nuggets, where he hit like 12 threes in that, sadly, an overtime loss against the Nuggets. But yeah.
And guys like Steph and Chris Paul have just given me hope in terms of the longevity of these smaller star guards. Like maybe a decade ago, I would have been more cynical and thought like we've seen the best of Dame and it's truly going to be a downward slope now. But I think he has more juice in the tank.
Yeah. All right. And at the top of tier 2C, who I kind of wanted to put in tier 2B, but I didn't, was Anthony Davis coming in at 14. I guess for people who didn't expect Russell Westbrook to be very good, Anthony Davis was probably hands down the most disappointing player in the NBA last year. This is a guy who in their championship run probably played like a top 3 to 5 player in the league during those playoffs. And really since then has just not gotten back to that same level. His jumper has deserted him. His aggressiveness around the rim is greatly diminished. And on defense, he's still really good, but not kind of that defensive player of the year type of impact player. And he gets hurt all the time. So those are all the reasons that he's at 14 and not at like 7. I'm hoping that because he's not even 30 yet, he should not have fallen off a cliff at this point in his career. He should be at his best. I'm hoping that he has a rebound season in him. I'm certainly the Lakers are hoping that he has a rebound season in him. Otherwise they won't make the playoffs. Or they might not. I mean, they'll be at the bottom of the play in if he doesn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, it felt like he had to be above all these other people just because of his age and what he's done in the past. But I really couldn't put him any higher just because of those reliability concerns and just what seems like kind of a lack of intensity over the last couple of years.
I hope he can make a 3-pointer again before he retires, but
be nice.
That'd be great.
At the same time, his stats aren't horrendous from last year. It isn't prime Anthony Davis stuff, but like, you know, he still got over 20 a game and like wasn't awful from 2, even though he loves to settle for mid-range jumpers and his shot chart is never what you want it to be.
I forgot.
Yeah.
I forgot the 3-point percentage was 19. I thought it would at least be in the 20s.
He's one of those guys where like, you know, definitely polarizing. And you kind of think it over for a while. And then I feel like for most of us, he ends up around the same spot, around 14, 15. I think it would have been an overreaction. And I'd like to believe I was saying this at the time too, that like after the bubble title, that he was a top 5 guy in the league. Just because he had top 5 guys, I feel like have to be able to lead a team that is in contention. 4 or 5, but you said 3 to 5. So, but yeah, he was like the Anthony Davis that from just a couple seasons ago was like the elite number 2 dude. And hopefully his body is in a place where he can be that guy again.
Like but that Anthony Davis,
I had him around the same area.
That Anthony Davis like might have been the best teammate LeBron's had. Like either him or that one season he had with Dwayne Wade where D Wade was still an elite player. But
yeah. And this is one of the weird, like, this is one of the things that makes basketball like so beautiful and like intriguing and team building is there are guys that are definitely less talented than Anthony Davis on this list that I actually don't think are as good at basketball as Anthony Davis that are higher on my list just because like this is where some of those intangible things start to matter. All of these guys have ridiculous numbers. And you just are not sure like which Anthony Davis is showing up for your team season by season at this point.
Yeah. He's someone who, depending on this year that he has, I could see him getting back into that top 10, or I could see him sliding into the 20s. Like, he's definitely in a prove it year for himself.
Yep, for sure.
Which is weird for a guy who won a championship.
Referendum.
Yep. All right. We're getting to the last two guys that we're going to discuss today.
Woo!
Hit me.
What a
Tier
joy. This
2B.
has been.
I call this tier underqualified to be a number 1, overqualified to be a number 2. We have at number 13, Trae Young, and at number 12, Devin Booker.
Really?
Yes.
You have Devin Booker below Ja.
Yes. Spoiler alert, 1 spot below Ja. Just because, well, we won't talk about Ja because that'll be next episode when we do the top 11 players in the NBA. But Devin Booker, he's a pure scorer. He playmaking wise, I mean, certainly when it comes to, I had a lot of debate between him and Trae Young, but just because of how horrendous Trae's playoffs this year were, and the defensive concerns, I couldn't put him above Devin Booker. But yeah, Devin Booker is just kind of like that quintessential scoring guard, and he's
a hooper's hooper.
He's a hooper's hooper. The Hoopers.
Yeah, he's a hooper's hooper, but 3 words trump that for me. Game 7, 2022. Okay.
Yes.
Chris Paul is what, 38 now, 37? I can't keep up. He gets a year older every year. But Devin Booker was the guy in his physical prime that team needed to get them to like the standard that they set for themselves. And it was a disaster.
We can't just blame the loss on DeAndre Ayton and move on.
No, we can't do that. Don't underrate the importance of who a guy is on your team as the number 1. I have Dame at 12 because of the tone he sets for his team. And if Dame had the talent around him that Booker had, I just don't think that game 7 happens.
Yeah. I mean, if I had a guarantee that Dame was going to be as good as he was in 2021, I would probably have him above Booker. It's just the injury, which is having me bump him down a few spots. But with Booker, this is why I say underqualified to be a 1, overqualified to be a 2, because we saw it when he got to the finals that, you know, when it came down to our best player is Giannis, your best player is Devin Booker, what's going to happen? There was a giant mismatch. So, but at the same time, the Suns were, you know, the dominant regular season team in the league last year. Booker had a lot to do with that. They were still really good when Chris Paul went down. There was definitely a debate in my mind the year they went to the finals of who was the number 1 on that team between Booker and Chris Paul. But I think last year it pretty firmly became Booker. And you look, number 1 on a very good, well-balanced team, but the team won over 60 games. Like, that's nothing to scoff at. And yes, he had a disastrous game 7, but overall has had a lot of good performances in the playoffs in his career. Although because of his reliance on jump shots, he does have a tendency to go cold sometimes. But yeah, he's right outside that top 10 because he doesn't have that kind of apex athleticism where he can just assert his will on the game if the shot isn't falling. But he is a pure enough scorer to me that I slot him right at that 12 spot.
His defensive buy-in is what ultimately got him above Trae for me. Like,
yes,
you can fit Devin Booker into so many teams. And at the end of the day, if none of these guys are 1s, like, that gave Booker the slight edge. At the same time, like, for his talent, like, what are his signature playoff moments? Like, he doesn't have a Ja. We should talk about Ja, even though we both had him at 11, because Sam might not be with us next episode, but definitely not based on his performance today. But like, Ja's game 2, what was it, 47 against the Warriors? Like Booker doesn't have a night I remember like that, where I was like, holy shit, this guy's a world beater. Like, and this is the part of the list where we get into these intangible, like, who do I want to go into the deep waters on national television? And so, like, Ja is above Devin Booker as of September 2022 for me.
You guys have convinced me, actually, because there's no way that Ja would have lost by 40.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Ja's also got the playmaking. Like, he's already one of the better passers in the league. And yeah, just like the force of will, the athleticism bit that, when it's not going well for the Grizzlies, Ja can just like put his head down and try to go dunk on someone and get fouled. Whereas when it's not going well for the Suns, they just kind of pass it around and maybe Devin Booker will take a mid-range pull-up. But that sort of rim pressure is a really big deal, particularly in the playoffs and drawing fouls.
Yeah.
Although to get really deep into the history here, wasn't Booker dumped by what's her name right before Game 7?
Oh, was he?
Was it Kendall?
It was one of them.
I think it was Kendall Jenner.
In defense of Devin Booker's playoff resume, I was remembering that he was really good in the closeout game against the Lakers the last year. I did not remember how good he was. He had 47 in that Game 6 against the
Yeah, he couldn't
Lakers.
miss.
So, and I remember that was one where, well, we don't have to get into that, but Devin Booker just couldn't miss in the first quarter. It was like, no, this is not going to a Game 7.
But who was on the floor for the Lakers?
Anthony Davis was for about a minute, and then everyone realized he couldn't move laterally, and then he was just out immediately because I think he was tired of people telling him he couldn't suit up. So he went out there for like 3 minutes to limp around.
It's not nothing, but it's not what the playoff equity that Ja already has.
Yeah, I just and also closeout game against Denver that same year he had 34, and then Game 1 against the Clippers he had 40. Spattering of other 30-point games. He had 2 40-point games in the finals actually against Milwaukee. So he's certainly not to shit on his resume. He's definitely showed up in some moments. Just once we start getting into the top 10, there's just a level of physicality that all those guys have, which, it's not necessarily fair, but having size and or tremendous athleticism is kind of a prerequisite to being like an absolute superstar, and Book just isn't quite on that level. Talking about Trey, just to kind of touch on him a little bit. He had a really bad series against Miami. It's always worse than I remember it. He actually had
but he had no help. He was seeing ghosts. It was bad. But my hope as a Trey fan is just like, it was a round one that nobody expected them to win. It wasn't like he choked on a global stage. So
yeah,
I can't believe I'm the one to have this take, but I'd probably put Dame ahead of Trey for next year.
It's possible. Yeah.
No, I did as well. And that's partly just because, like, by all accounts, Trey is like truly one of the worst defenders in the league.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say people.
All right. Well, I guess we've spoiled Jaws 11, so we've made it all the way to the top 10, which we will do next time. But yeah, it seems like the big sticking points were the big man Zion and the also big man James Harden. But yeah, looking forward to wrapping up this list next time and really saying who the actual superstars in the NBA is, because superstar is definitely a term that gets thrown around a lot. Also, the term top 10 player gets thrown around a lot. So now you know the bar. You have to be better than John Morant to be a top 10 player in the NBA. Otherwise, I don't want to hear anything about top 10.
Yeah. Sam.
Well said.
Sam, is Giannis the best player in the league for you?
Yeah.
Okay. I just since I'm not sure you'll be here for that, I just wanted to know. I think that any other answer doesn't make much sense at this point.
Yeah, no. Spoiler alert, he is for me as well.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Check out the Knicks Cave, starring the Klotz brothers. This has been the Pod Sham Pod.
Knicks Cave?